The opinions you hear on Your Mountain from individual hosts or guests do not necessarily represent those of Your Mountain, our sponsors, or other entities we're affiliated with professionally or otherwise. You've waited long enough. Go listen to the show.
There are millions of acres of opportunity out there. They belong to you. Every day, decisions are being made that affect your land, your water, your wildlife. You should know about them. This is Your Mountain.
Hey everybody, and welcome back for another episode of the Your Mountain podcast. As always, I'm your host, David Wilms, and as always, sitting across the computer from me is Nephi Cole. Also, host, co-host, whatever you want to call him.
Just guy.
Extraordinaire.
Podcast guy.
Podcast guy.
Friend.
Guru.
Podcast friend.
There you go.
Your podcast friend, listeners.
I'm so excited right now, I can't even do small talk with you.
All right, let's just get to it.
Here's the deal.
The world has changed.
I am planning.
It's a brave new
hike.
world.
Yeah, I'm planning a hike, Nephi.
Mm-hmm.
I have been driving on Interstate 80 in Wyoming for decades. Literal decades. And every single time I drive across the state, east to west, every time I'm on my way to Rawlins or Rock Springs or Green River or Evanston, anytime I'm on my way to Lander, I'm driving past this gigantic mountain, this beautiful 11,200 foot peak.
Elk Mountain.
That just sits
You're driving
off.
past Elk Mountain. Yeah.
I'm talking about, I am this summer.
Everybody thinks that that's the only mountain in Wyoming.
Right? I know.
Because that's all they drive past.
But this summer, I'm going to buy a big flag. I might even have one made. Maybe I'll take a Your Mountain flag. I'll get a Your Mountain flag made. And I am going to drive there. And I've already been sitting on Onyx and I've decided where I'm going to park. And I am going to summit this mountain that I've been looking at for decades wanting to summit, and I am going to unfurl a flag on the top of it and stick it in the ground and probably scream from the rooftop. It's like the world just changed today. You want to join me?
No. On the hike?
Yeah.
No, I might. Pretty interesting, though. Elk Mountain. So for anybody that doesn't know, we might as well just get to it. You're going to be able to get there because you're going to cross the corner.
That's exactly
what
I'm going to do.
You're going to take your life in your own hands. And you're going to step across that fence. No matter what's going to happen.
No fence. No fence. I'm going to go across open.
You got a spot where you don't have to worry about a fence. Yeah. You think it'll be more fences because of this? Because here's what happened today. The ruling came out that it's legal to corner cross, and not just in Wyoming, but in any place within the circuit. Correct?
Within the 10th Circuit. So, in the states of Wyoming, Utah, Colorado, New Mexico, Kansas, and Oklahoma.
Sorry, Montana.
Montana, you're stuck in the 9th. You're stuck in the 9th.
That's what you get for your 9th circuit. You can all just, this is just, you deserved this, Ryan. You deserved it.
Here's the deal.
I love you, Cal. Different Ryan.
Here's the deal. If you've listened to this podcast for any length of time, you know that we've taken a pretty cautious approach to this corner crossing case. From day one, we've been pretty cautious in the approach, and we've tried to make the case of, here's what the hunters are going to argue, and here's what the landowner is arguing. And with the straight face test, it was hard to say. You could see a path where either one of them, either one of their positions might be viewed as valid, right? And if you remember, so let's go back just for a second, just a quick history recap, just a real quick history recap. So several years ago, you have 4 hunters from Missouri, elk hunters from Missouri, come to Wyoming, and they want to elk hunt in this area around Elk Mountain. And this area around Elk Mountain is what's known as the checkerboard area, meaning when the railroad was coming through in the 1860s and probably into the 1870s as a means of helping the railroad finance the project of building a transcontinental railroad, because the companies were having difficulty raising private capital, and Congress did not want to appropriate public dollars to this because there was a question of whether they constitutionally could do that. This checkerboard system was created where for 10 miles north and 10 miles south of the railroad, every other section was given to the railroad, and the other section remained in the public domain, subject to, and the idea was that those other parcels would be homesteaded at some point and become private property. And ultimately you'd have this block of private land that ran from east to west where this rail was. And you'd have settlements pop up and, towns and all that kind of stuff and all the infrastructure that goes along with it. Well, Wyoming's a super dry state, and those federal parcels mostly were never homesteaded. So they remained in the federal estate. And those parcels that the railroad owned, they've transferred them over the years to different ownership. And some of those parcels landed in the hands of the Iron Bar Holdings Company, which is owned by a private individual from North Carolina that bought this big ranch in Wyoming. Made his money in pharmaceuticals or something like that, bought this big ranch, and it's become the centerpiece of this huge dispute now in this checkerboard area. So these 4 elk hunters came to Wyoming to hunt, and they were using onX and were very careful to only be on public land, right? So they'd come to one of these places where 2 parcels of public intersect with 2 parcels of private. They were on the public land, and they step over the corner marker, so as never letting their foot set foot on private land. And in one particular instance, there was the corners, the private landowners had driven T-posts into the ground at one of these corners to prevent somebody from just stepping through. So they actually brought a stepladder to climb over the T-post and not touch the T-post, and again, not set foot on the private land. So they had this momentary incursion into the airspace of the private landowner while they went onto public land. Well, this infuriated the landowner, right? And ultimately, the landowner convinced the county attorney to press charges, right, and prosecute these 4 hunters criminally for criminal trespass in Wyoming. They went to trial, and a jury in Carbon County, Wyoming, acquitted the 4 hunters. So they were acquitted of any criminal trespass. But the landowner was still upset about the situation. And so, what's a upset landowner going to do? They file a civil suit in federal district court alleging a civil trespass. And that case and they allege some absurd amount of damages. And you can go back and listen to our prior podcasts of like this, the absurdity of some of that argument.
We've covered all this on multiple podcasts, like 4.
Yeah, right. So I'm just racing through this. And so we get to this point where the civil lawsuit happens, and the district court judge in Wyoming issues a decision that was a little confusing, I think, in the language. It said that the very specific things that those hunters did, of using the ladder, of not touching the ground of the private landowners, and only passing through the airspace momentarily, said all of these things did not constitute a trespass. And so the belief was at that time that at least in Wyoming, and at least in the checkerboard portion of Wyoming, that corner crossing was legal.
Yeah, it was very tight. The decision that came out of the first case was very narrow. It's like he said, like in this specific situation, this is my determination, but he didn't make it broader.
Yeah, this situation, these specific facts, all of this sort of thing.
Very specific.
So it was very specific, as you'd
and
expect.
We were clear about that. We said, like, in this case, and
to be fair, like, we were at the point, and I know I was publicly saying, I'm not ready to go out there and advocate for crossing corners at this point. I'm not ready to say, yes, you can be doing this, particularly in other states. I think I might have said to somebody along the way, like, look, if there's one place you could probably cross, it's like where that ranch is, because after everything that they've gone through and no county attorney was going to want to touch that in Carbon County anymore. Game warden wasn't going to want to touch that anymore. They already went through the whole prosecution. So it's like, if you're going to pick a place to do it, maybe that was the place to do it. But, we're very careful to say, look, the decision was going to be appealed, and it was appealed.
Well, be careful what you ask for. So if you're the private landowner who's like so mad that you didn't get your way, and so you're like, we're going to appeal it. Well,
so they did.
Guess what you got?
To the 10th Circuit.
Yeah. And everybody, if you're a private landowner, you're mad about this, you have nobody to blame but this guy. Because
go ahead.
Because here's what happened. Like, I mean, he FAFO. He just decided, he's like, yeah, we're going to go and we're going to press this. We're going to appeal it. And so the decision came out, and the decision is not finite, and it is not just about Elk Mountain. It is broad, and
yes,
it's precedent setting.
So let's talk about this, like what the case actually did and some of the things that I take away. So like I said, I came from a really, really cautious place before, right? And even after the district court, I was still relatively cautious. So if you listened to us before, you'd hear like this tone in my voice now is different, and it's different for a reason, right? And it's because the 10th Circuit's decision resolved a couple of what I think maybe were some outstanding questions that the district court judge, I wasn't convinced. Maybe the district court judge punted on a little bit, didn't feel like it was right before them. But here's one of the big questions, right? And this 10th Circuit took it on, and it's the airspace ownership question. Because one of the big issues was, does the landowner own the airspace directly above their property? And if so, if they own the airspace and somebody passes through that, then couldn't that be a trespass? And maybe you'd have to show some sort of harm, but couldn't that potentially be a trespass? And this is the interesting piece. The 10th Circuit acknowledged that the right, talked about this ad coelum doctrine, which is dates back to Roman law. But it's this, whoever owns the soil owns everything up to the sky and down to the depths, like heaven to hell. You own it all, this ad coelum doctrine. And it goes through this whole analysis on this doctrine. And it talks about Wyoming law then as well, and who owns the airspace. And they make the statement. They say, in Wyoming, they say, first, Wyoming adopted common law, right? And common law has deemed, and this is a quote from the case, an incursion into the immediately enveloping atmosphere, however fleeting, is a trespass. Okay? So what the 10th Circuit says is, yes, a momentary incursion under Wyoming law is a trespass. And the second thing they say is that Wyoming has an ownership of space statute that says the ownership of space above the lands and waters of the state is vested in the owners of it. And so they're saying, yes, Wyoming or the landowner owns the airspace. And under Wyoming law and the common law that it adopts, if you enter that airspace in any way, even for a brief moment, that would be a trespass. But then they go this next step, and this is the beautiful piece of this case that I don't think was really adequately addressed at the district court level. They go to the next step of saying, next we have to consider whether federal law ratifies corner crossing where state law would otherwise prohibit it. So they're saying, okay, Wyoming state law looks like it prohibits corner crossing, but is there federal law on the books that ratifies corner crossing and in essence supersedes that state law? And the answer that the court came up with for this was yes. Yes, that the Unlawful Enclosures Act of 1885 is still good law in force and effect today, prohibits the enclosure of public lands, or stated another way, it prohibits the exclusion, the attempt to exclude anybody from lawfully entering public lands. And implicit in this law is the ability to enter public lands, to access public lands through the airspace, right? So the court, and without going way down and just reciting everything they said, at the highest level here, the court says the Unlawful Enclosures Act of 1885 is good law, remains valid law today, and that implicit in that law is the ability to access for lawful purposes public lands. And then it goes one more step, and it very, very expressly says that because of that, and because of a series of case law that they go through that applies the Unlawful Enclosures Act, that because of those things, that the state law is preempted by federal law. Okay? What does that mean? Why is that a big deal?
Because that means that when the next legislative session comes into effect, we talked about this before. If people get out ahead of themselves, the state just passes another law and makes it, extra illegal. But they can't now, because the 10th Circuit's decision takes that off the table. It says the Unlawful Enclosures Act holds sway here, and it doesn't matter what new state law you make if it's intended to block this decision. It doesn't apply because the federal law holds primacy.
Yeah, under the Constitution, federal law, if you can't resolve a conflict between state and federal law, if they can't be read together, right, then the federal law is going to trump state law. And in this case, they flat out say Wyoming law is preempted.
This is very interesting for a number of reasons. So, how much do we want to talk about the number of reasons? I think the first one to me is this. Is that you have, I'd say there's still some cautions here. So for people who are using Onyx and think they can go anyplace, which is that I don't think that this decision held that it's okay for you to trespass.
No.
I know, so here's the concern, right? Is you have to be very careful. Just because on a map you think that you're okay and that you're at the corner on Onyx, you better make really sure you know where the corner is. Sometimes the fences aren't lined up right. I don't think anybody is going to prosecute this because it does open you up now to where there's a certain level of safety here, but you still better know where you're at. It's not a carte blanche permission to go wherever you want, but it is in some cases ability to corner cross.
Yeah, no. Here's the limitation. Here's the big limitation on it. It is you can under this opinion, corner crossing is legal so long as you do not physically touch the land, the private land over which you're crossing, right? So even if you were to say, oh man, I'm Usain Bolt and I'm super fast and I'm going to sprint and it's going to just be momentary and I'm just going to cut this corner. If you set foot even momentarily on that private land, arguably that could still be a trespass.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, they're not saying it is 100%. They haven't gone to say all the things that would be a trespass. What they have said is this one thing, this act of crossing at a defined place where these corners come together, going from one parcel of public to another parcel of public, momentarily passing through the airspace without setting foot, physically touching the private landowner's land, and without damaging their property or disrupting the enjoyment and use of that property, right? As long as you do those things, you can legally cross at that point.
So if you're at a survey marker, you're pretty much safe. If not, you better just, and again, it's like the minutia of this, of somebody being like, well, I think you're half a meter off to the left or something like that, is, it is ridiculous. But remember when we got to this case in the first place, how ridiculous it was, and realize that some other people are going to be equally ridiculous. And the other thing to just be cognizant of as you go do this is there's going to be some really angry private landowners.
Oh, no doubt.
There's going to be a lot of people who think that they literally did think that they had the world bottled up.
No doubt.
And now they don't.
And I want to get to a couple of those things here in a second too, like some of what could the ripple effect of this decision turn out to be in those regards. But coming back to this, there's a couple other points I just want to make, because one of the points of confusion from the district court opinion was how broadly did the opinion, how broad was the application of the opinion? Did it only apply in the checkerboard, or did it apply other places? And some of the language that judge used seemed to really narrow it to, if you are crossing in a checkerboard, and they had defined checkerboard as this railroad area. If you were crossing in those areas under these conditions, the way these hunters did, then it would not be. Then you could corner cross legally, and it would not be a trespass.
That's the first case, correct? The first.
That's the first case.
Yeah, on appeal.
Here's the thing that I think is different. While the court did spend a lot of time talking about the history of land ownership in the West and in Wyoming, and talked about how these checkerboard lands, these railroad checkerboard lands came into being, and talked about the Unlawful Enclosures Act and how it came into being and how it was really associated with this railroad checkerboard area, the application of the Unlawful Enclosures Act is certainly not limited to just the checkerboard area. It's unlawful to enclose public lands. And so this decision, the way it was written in the 10th Circuit, I think is much clearer. And to my eye, it appears to apply beyond just the checkerboard, the railroad checkerboard lands, right? It would apply to all of these lands that meet these conditions in all of the states within the 10th Circuit, which is, certainly different than the district court, or maybe clearer than the district court's decision. I would also say one other thing, a reminder, we're not giving legal advice on this. I'm not advising anybody to go out there and go hop in corners all over the place and think, I've got carte blanche to do whatever I want, wherever I want to get onto these lands. It's now all open access, that stuff. There's still, it's still a kind of a narrow decision. And there are, the court even acknowledged there are still some unanswered questions around liability and duty of care and some of these legal terms that I'm throwing around there for both the landowners and the public that might be corner crossing in these places. So just be aware of that. But all that said, this is a significant victory for folks that want public access. And I want to say one other thing, which is kudos, big time kudos and a tip of the hat to the attorney representing the 4 hunters. First of all, did a great job over the course of a number of years. Really great job, really great legal work there. Kudos to the 4 hunters, right? That stuck in the fight and have continued through this the whole way, despite being, really like pretty aggressively pursued by this landowner, and they stuck with it. And kudos to those like meat eater and backcountry hunters and anglers that helped raise the money to help pay for their legal defense, so that they could, if all of those things didn't happen, it would never get to this point where you had this kind of a decision. So, just a quick tip of the hat to all of those folks that were involved in helping make that happen. And then a reminder, and then we'll get into some of the okay, what could happen here? But a reminder also, there's still another step in this process, right? So the landowner still has the opportunity to petition to the Supreme Court to see if the court might accept an appeal of this decision. Courts are reticent. The Supreme Court is reticent to take on cases. Less than 1% of petitions for cert before the court are actually accepted. So it's tough. I do think it's interesting, and I was talking with somebody else about this. Yeah, you might think this is funny, Nephi. You know how sometimes you, when you're writing something, you like to flatter, like if you're directing what you're writing towards an audience, you want to flatter that audience. I think of that sometimes as a adjunct professor. I have students sometimes write, and they'll do a writing assignment, and they'll cite some of my work in a writing assignment to me. And I always think that's kind of funny. Guess who the 10th Circuit judges cited more than once in this opinion?
Gorsuch? Who?
Gorsuch.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah. That's where you're going. Yeah. Justice Gorsuch. Yeah. Cited him on more than one occasion. It's like they were teeing it up.
Yeah.
You flatter ahead of time, teeing it up just in case the Supreme Court takes this case. I thought that was interesting. It was smart. It was smart legal writing. He's from Colorado as well.
Yeah. So so this is within the circuit, understands the issues. He's big on land issues. So it seems like one that he might, be interested in. I don't know if everybody else wants to take it. And then they've declined to take a number of big cases lately where they didn't have split opinions, where they didn't have, so.
And there's no split opinion here, right? Like this is the first circuit to weigh in on this.
So somebody from Montana is going to have to get arrested.
There are access issues percolating and have been for some time in Montana. I've seen them in Washington State as well. Like,
you got to take one for the team.
Recognize that this case holds precedential value in the 10th Circuit, but it can be persuasive in other circuits. And I would argue, the 10th Circuit is generally speaking, a pretty conservative circuit. The judges tend to be pretty conservative. It's a more conservative circuit. The 9th Circuit traditionally is not, right? And so the fact that you had such a strong opinion come out of the 10th Circuit, would indicate to me that the likelihood of success in the 9th Circuit is probably pretty high as well if it runs that course, and that this opinion could have some persuasive effect in other circuits if cases come before them, if they work their way up to those circuits. But right now, if you're in Montana and you're in the crazy mountains or something, like you don't have an answer to your question yet in Montana. But this is a big deal. But
just
what
goes to show you should have given more out. See, that's the problem with Montana. Montana, you don't have anybody to blame but yourself, you Montana guys, because you guys are really stingy with your Montana guys. You're tonight. Really stingy with your out-of-state tags. See,
there it is.
So
I was wondering where this is coming from.
If you would have let these guys from Missouri get tags a little bit easier, maybe you'd be enjoying this. But this, see, Wyoming, this is why we do it. We let people come and fix these problems for us. You're welcome.
It felt. I was like, where is he going with this? It felt a little like you're being really harsh on our neighbors to the north. There's a lot of good people in Montana.
Well,
a lot of awesome places to explore.
Good enough? I don't know. I can't get a tag in Montana, so maybe you guys should just be a little bit more, a little less tight-fisted. It's interesting. There's a lot of interesting stuff in this. The other thing that's interesting, I wonder. You wonder where the ripple effects, where they're going to be in things like. I think about the subdivision around Elk Mountain that has, if you bought a lot here in this subdivision, they have a process where they it's not a lottery, but it's like you wait every couple of years and then you get to be the guy that goes to hunt Elk Mountain. And now, this is, sorry guys. Now everybody can hunt Elk Mountain. And there are a number of areas where I think that that will be affected. I'm hoping that everybody who wants to hunt the places that I want to hunt usually will now just be looking at maps, trying to find places they can corner cross instead. So there'll be like 10 dudes at every corner of some new spot, and then they'll all leave the spot that I was going to hunt.
Well, I mean, it unlocks a lot of places for sure.
Yeah,
which is going to redistribute people, and that's going to cause changes in animal movement and behavior. Probably, it's in some places where there maybe hasn't been a lot of pressure before. But you also have to remember some of these corners, they go 10 miles, right? And how far are people willing to go back in there? Corner to corner, you're still gonna be able to find a lot of remote places. The other thing it could do is, I could see this depressing property values a bit for ranches in these checkerboards, because up to this point, I mean, you've seen the same things I've seen, Nephi. It's like when you go to a land broker or something like they're selling these ranches that pop up for sale. What are they listing for? I've seen ranches listed for 90,000 acres for sale. They list them that way, 90,000 acres for sale, and then you dig in deeper and find out they've got 10,000 deeded.
Yeah.
And then they've got 80,000 of grazing leases. But then they draw this big circle on it and they say, no public access to all of this. So they're effectively trying to say you've bought all of this public land and you effectively own it. They're selling it. They've been for years. It's been kind of a disgusting thing, frankly. But it could have an impact on property values.
Yeah, I hope it does. I'll be frank. I mean, I understand why people like that. And if I was the guy that had just bought my 10 acres that, gave me, access to 10,000 acres that somebody else didn't get, yeah, I could see how I was grumpy, but I'm not that guy. I'm a member of the general public, and I'm a guy that puts on boots, and I truly believe this opens up, a new question that I think it's probably time to, we're going to hear more people talking about, which is with the Unlawful Enclosures Act. Like, what else do I get access to? Because there are a lot of places that are, very difficult, and it's not just because of corner crossing or impossible to access because they've been effectively landlocked. And so, does the public, I think people will start asking, and I don't know how you get there, but does the
I don't think it changes that problem.
No,
I don't think it impacts that problem.
I think people will ask about it, Dave. I don't think it gives anybody access that they didn't have before. But I do think it's going to spark some discussion on it, especially if it gets to the Supremes. And that's what I think is interesting. I don't think, because if the Supremes decide to take it up, what would be the reasoning? If SCOTUS took it, they'd have to think that there was a bigger question there to be answered. And typically, when they take a case like this, I don't think that they tend to, they don't kind of nibble around the edges. Sometimes they take a big bite of the argument. So it'd be interesting if it got appealed up there. I don't think it will, but I would frankly love to see it, because I have questions.
I mean, you could argue that there's a national interest here. You've got public land that's managed by the federal government for the benefit of everybody, and does the public have the ability to access that public land? And what does the Unlawful Enclosures Act mean? Is access, as the 10th Circuit says, implicit to those parcels? It's an interesting question. I would not be surprised if the Supreme Court decides to take this one if the appeal comes. I'd also not be surprised if they decline to take it because you don't have a split. You either don't have a split circuit or you don't have multiple circuits coming up, and
Yeah, there are a variety
we'll see.
of areas,
We'll
though,
see.
that where we have these issues. And as there's, you've been into looking at courthouse records and things like that, and you see the old road, and you're like, well, what's this old road? Well, there's an easement on it. Well, who can access it? Well, state lands can access it, or a Forest Service guy, they can use that easement, but the general public can't. And so you're like, why not? And, I'm kind of the opinion that I'd like to see the public be able to access public lands.
Well, you know that there's a process now. There was the Maplands Act that was passed, and it's going to result in the digitization of all of the easements to public lands all over the country. Something like 90,000 different easements to public lands all over the country, and
what
probably some that most people don't know about. It's a massive effort and undertaking. It's going to take a long time to get done.
Yeah,
but that'll be a game changer for accessing parcels that maybe people didn't know, or maybe people did know, but they didn't know how to find out about it, or, anyway, there's that. But there's also that other piece you were talking about, and I got to come back to it because I just got to push back just a little bit. Yes, people will talk a little bit about those parcels that are completely surrounded by private land, public land that's 100% surrounded by private land. But this case doesn't address that in any way, shape, or form. Like 0% addresses that scenario. Right?
It's still not really pushback, right now, Dave, if we agree.
Well, I think we agree, but
you just
said
clarifying it.
You said it in a confusing way, so I was making sure. I just want to make sure it's crystal clear that nothing in this case, in this decision, addresses that scenario. And in that scenario, without permission from the landowner, you still cannot access those. Without permission from the landowner or an existing easement, you cannot access those lands unless you're dropped in by helicopter or something. So just laying that out there. Here's one other thing I wanted to mention. I almost fully expect this to happen, and I don't know why. Maybe this is the cynic in me. But it would not surprise me to get stories from people saying, I went out there to corner cross and I could not find a survey marker to save my life. And so I had no idea where the actual corner was. And so I had to turn back. I hate to say this, but I wouldn't be surprised to hear stories about
people pulling corner
markers getting pulled. And because of that, I gotta say this. It is a violation of federal law with a penalty up to 6 months in prison and or a fine to destroy, deface, change, or remove any government survey monument. Like, it is against the law. Against federal law and frequently under state law as well. So I got to emphasize that, but I still will say it will not surprise me to hear stories of people not being able to find survey markers. And then how do you prove who removed the marker in these places that are like some of the most remote places left in the lower 48 states? It would be very difficult.
In the same vein, I would say, though, if somebody did remove the marker, then they're going to try and say that that you're in the wrong versus them being in the wrong. Now you get into the he said, she said in a major way. Like, oh yeah, well, I think you're on us. Well, I think I'm not. Well, where's the marker? Well, there isn't one. And so, there is a huge amount of gray area here. And so now I don't think that means, the same advice that we would have given before, which is try and talk to a landowner and see if you can be friends. That's the best thing to do. But at the same time, I think in an area where you have, I think you're going to be able to make the case. So it's interesting.
I think so too.
It's challenging, Dave. It's challenging.
Yeah, it's challenging. I think so too. I'm just saying I do. And I think they're going to be in the minority, but in every scenario, there are always some nefarious actors. There are always some bad actors, right? And so I do think there are going to be some situations. isolated here and there where you might find survey pins getting pulled. And so then if you're out there, you cannot find that corner and really be sure that when you're stepping across that corner, you're not setting foot on private land. And, you
I
roll
would
the
think
dice
if you're
at
in
your
an
own
area
risk, right?
where somebody's willing to do that, I actually think that there's peril that you're going to see much worse things than that. So you're going to see
Possible.
Yeah, because I mean, if you think that they're mad, so they don't want me to be on their place, so they're going to pull a survey pin and then they're just going to go hide in the woods and watch me. That's unlikely. I think you're going to see confrontations. You're going to see hunter harassment. I think those things are all more likely. You're going to see vandalism of tents and things like that. Those things I think are, if somebody's willing to deface government, to pull a survey pin, what else are they willing to do? And I think that's something to be concerned about.
I do think the other thing that could happen is you could see actual increased incidents of actual trespass, right? I do think you could see something like that happen too. And I'll give you an example. This is anecdotal, and this sort of gives you an example of how I've handled it over the past couple of years since the district court decision came out. I've got a friend of mine that it has a family ranch in the checkerboard in Wyoming. And I happened to draw an antelope tag this last year in that unit. And I called her up and said, hey, I drew an antelope tag and I'm bringing my son out. And would it be possible for me to hunt out there? And I can hunt mostly the public land, but I'd love to be able to pass through your private land. Or if I see something there, would love the opportunity. And she's invited me to come hunt on her place in the past. And when I called her up, she said, oh, I am so sorry. I would normally love to, but there are two issues we're dealing with right now. And one of them is there's a big transmission line going in and it's messing up our grazing rotations. And we've had to pull all of our cows from a place where they'd normally be right now. And we've had to put them into this checkerboard area. And so there's a lot higher density of livestock in there than there was in the past. And we're just worried about, stressing them, right? And then the other piece is, she said, and the other thing is we've just had so many more instances. It feels like we're just constantly battling trespassers ever since this corner crossing decision, and not people crossing from public to public, but people just going everywhere, just wandering everywhere, assuming that they can go wherever they want. And I'm like, I'm so sorry to hear that. And I totally respect that. And, I'll find other places to go. And she was super apologetic. And I'm like, even if the corner crossing were legal, I would have, and I think technically it was in that instance, under the district court opinion because of where it was located. I still was like, I made the decision. I'm not going to go there, out of respect for her and kind of what they were dealing with operationally. And other people may disagree with that approach and, the approach I took in that situation, but that was my decision on how to handle it then. I probably could have legally hunted on those public parcels and corner crossed there and avoided her private property. But I chose just to not go there and find someplace else to go that year. Right.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, these issues, the public isn't always a great steward. And so I say that because, there are some of the pushback against this is there are places that you might still be able to corner cross to get into, but, what is the place and why are you doing it? And so there's, I have good friends who have, small pieces of state ground surrounded by a massive amount of private. And, you may be able to get into that, small section of state, but you're not really trying to hunt that section of state if you do. You're really trying to access the private. And so, this does, again, bring up the question is if that's what you're trying to do, then you should have a relationship. You should make a relationship with that private landowner. I'm less sympathetic in situations when, if somebody's got 10 acres and they're trying to box out 10,000, that's an entirely different thing than, somebody who's got 50,000 and then there's 300 acres of state, jammed in the middle of it. These are different things, in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, and you may have decided maybe you think I'm soft and I handled it the wrong way in this particular instance, but it's like, I've got a relationship with the family, and I didn't, I don't want to jeopardize that over the long haul. And it was no skin off my teeth to go. There's plenty of public land around I could hunt. I didn't have to go into that spot. But I'm just reminding, like, they're going through some stuff too, right? And there's going to be an adaptation period as well. And the one I'm working with is like a 5th generation kind of ranching family.
For
right?
sure.
Like, they provide a lot of access and things, but they're dealing with people that are, like, frankly, like, this is why I come back, like, we're not your lawyer, but, like, know the law, right? Like, understand what the ruling actually means, and that it doesn't actually mean that you can go walking across somebody's private land to get to the public land, which is what was happening to them. It was sort of blowing my mind to hear the stories of how many people were just, walking across their land to get to public land under the guise of, well, I'm allowed to corner cross. And they were like, I can go to these places now. Like, not that way though.
Yeah.
So as hunters, we have an obligation to be responsible about this. Like, I'm super excited. I led this podcast off with, I'm going to take a flag up to the top of Elk Mountain, and I'm going to do that. Like, like, that's a thing that's going to happen. But I'm going to follow the law as well. And I'm going to, it's incumbent upon us as public land users to know where we are, and to know what the law is in those places, and be respectful, and also be respectful of the surrounding private property rights as well.
Well, I'd throw one more thing out there. So don't be this guy. Here's what this guy would do. And I'm not this guy. But there are these people. It's just like, you find some spot on a map and you decide, hey, I'm going to go in there. And you find how you can access this location, and nobody else is willing to access it. Why? Because it's so hard. And so then you will be the guy that, like, corner crosses and then heads in and goes up a cliff and across 3 ravines and then through a river, and you get into a spot. And then you shoot something. And then you
right.
and then you're like, "Oh, how am I going to get it out now?" Well, you know what you're not going to do? Like, a lot of these guys, like, what they're not going to do is try and take it back out the way that they came in. And so then they end up calling the rancher, who they're like, well, I didn't really trespass, but I did everything I possibly could except call you to be able to get in behind your freaking house. And I'm in here and I can see the highway. It's like it's a mile away, but I went 15 miles around it so I didn't have to talk to you. And, I just killed a big elk back here. Can I, drag it through your pasture? Don't do that. Make sure that if you, that's great. It's great to have access to these places, but if you're if your success is going to require you to make an enemy, then make the call first. Make the ask first. And if you can't do it that way, then don't do it.
Yeah, I was like, or, if you don't have to make the ask, right? It's public land, right? So the or is just wherever you're going, be prepared to come out that same way.
Yeah.
And it may take you 8 trips, but you're going to have to do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, this is going to be some remote country.
I love the adventure of it. I love somebody else's adventure of it. That's what I'll say. I think it's exciting, and at the same time, boy, be smart about it.
Yeah.
Think about these guys from Missouri and what they did. Do you remember what they did to get in there? I mean, they were pretty committed. I mean, these guys are like welding ladders and all sorts of stuff. I mean,
if I were
I'm not
an entrepreneurial mind, and we all know that neither one of us are, because we lose money on this podcast. But
yeah,
we
we're
say
not
that all the
making
time.
anything.
But if we were entrepreneurial, we would go get carbon fiber engineering and create a small business selling these ladders that you could pack down ultralight in your backpack and climb over these corners. in places that might have fences or something. Like
I mean,
there's a business there. I'm just saying, there's a business there. It's just not us.
it's not us.
Not going to be us doing it.
No, well, interesting case. I think it's going to make a lot of sportsmen happy. You know what I'm hoping that it does? I'm hoping that it actually opens up more discussions about easements. I'm hoping
and transfers. Exchanges.
Yeah, I hope
exchanges.
I hope it opens up since if you can't keep people out, and you can't, that groups like backcountry hunters and anglers, and I don't know if Meat has interest, but people will start saying like, hey, can we buy an access? Just
think about how many you could even take Meat Eater or take businesses out of the question and just think about Land and Water Conservation Fund dollars. And
how cool would it be just put a gate?
That's what I was going to say.
Places, just a little green gate.
You don't need an easement anymore, right? You don't have to have an easement. Although theoretically you could do an easement just to make it just to create a little space so you don't have to go right over the corner. But either to use LWCF money to install ladders or gates or whatever makes the access point at those corners make sense. Or in some places, maybe an easement does make a lot of sense because your fence doesn't quite align with the corner, and so maybe it would make sense to
I just think it'd be really cool to have.
Think about how many you could buy with you're chucking slivers of land. It would be cheap, right? It would be cheap. You could buy so many with
you
this.
Just say, hey, I know you do.
We've
got this corner, and you're worried about people are going to be coming over all the time. So why don't we just do an easement where you're like an easement for this each side of this gate for 2 posts on your place, and then the 1 foot that somebody's going to stand on when they walk through it, and then just create these opportunities. I think that's kind of the simplistic version of it, but I think there's a lot of places like that. And you and I talked about there was a state lands piece that was for sale in the Laramie Range, and we were dealing with, we were talking with some different groups about like, hey, instead of fight this and like all the time, like what about just being the group that holds this 100-foot long easement that is going to be required so that sportsmen can always access this place. And I think if we can get more discussions like that, I think that'd be amazing. Just, again, you don't need massive easements, but just simple sportsmen's easements to get people into these landlocked areas. I think it'd just be so cool.
Oh, I do too. I also could see this supercharging, maybe not supercharging, but at least lighting a spark under some of these land exchange proposals. I think you might find some folks that, now that it could potentially impact land value and that it's not there's not the exclusive use of those parcels anymore. That there might be more interest in figuring out land exchanges. How do we block these lands up a little bit different? So I could see it leading to that discussion more as well. Like there are a lot of things that could happen from this, but right now what we know is that the one thing that can happen from this is that if you're in these 6 states that we mentioned in the 10th Circuit, you can now, as long as you don't touch the private property, corner crossing is something you can do. And it's again, tip of the hat to everybody that's been involved in this fight over the past several years. You put yourself out there, particularly those 4 hunters, right? They went through a lot, and to the benefit of everybody, of the whole public, right? Like they're going through what they went through, a criminal prosecution, and then this stressful civil lawsuit. The end result of it is, yeah, they're not civilly liable, but now all of a sudden the public can do something they didn't know if they could do for the longest time. That's a pretty cool thing. Anything else?
Nope.
I'm going to wrap it up. I know we had another topic. It just means we have another topic for another podcast.
I know, because it's 53 minutes into this one.
Yeah. So we're going to wrap it up. And thanks for listening.
It's late at night, by the way, so I'll tell you. And I'm sick.
It is super late.
I got a cold, Dave.
You fooled me. I didn't know you were sick. That's
how amazing.
Bummer.
That's how amazing modern pharmaceuticals are.
Well, yeah, I'm sorry you're sick. Well, then we definitely need to wrap it up. Maybe we won't have to record another corner crossing podcast for a while. But
I hope not. Let's go, Montana.
Yeah, right. Until it's in another state, then we'll take it on. Everybody, thanks again for listening. We always appreciate it. I'm going to say it again. I say this always ad nauseum. I know you're probably sick of me hearing it, but if you haven't gone out there and given us that 5-star rating, please do it. Really appreciate when you do. Leave a review, preferably a good one. That's the currency until we figure out how to monetize this thing. So again, thanks everybody. We'll get another one out before you know it. And remember that life is about experiences. So go have one.